Good morning, everyone. My name is David Pollock. It is Friday, April 3rd, 2026, and this is a public hearing of the Brookline Advisory Committee's Land Use, Zoning, and Sustainability Subcommittee on the subject of warrant Article 15, which seeks to adjust the threshold above which multifamily housing projects are required to build inclusionary zoning units on site as opposed to have an option of whether to build them on site or to make a payment into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have a quorum of the subcommittee here, including Linda Pelkey, Brian Ladd, Kelly Hardebeck, and myself. We're joined by two of the petitioners, Alec Lebovitz and David Lescoyer, as well as Roger Blood, representing himself, but also from the Housing Advisory Board, and staff, Polly Selko, the Director of Regulatory Planning, and Jonathan, I thought I saw Jonathan
Klein.
Simpson.
Yeah,
There he
there he
is.
is.
I see Jonathan Klein.
Yes.
I didn't see Jonathan Simpson. I was hallucinating. That maybe.
Different
No, I think he said he was busy today. Anyway, and Jonathan Klein, also from the Housing Advisory Board. So I think we'll start by opening the floor to the petitioners to introduce their article. So the floor is yours, Alec and David.
Thanks so much, David, and apologies, I have my camera off. These workday meetings necessitate some multitasking on my part, so apologies for that. I did want to give a brief overview of Article 15 and our rationale for bringing it. Folks may remember that in 2023, the original change was made to the inclusionary zoning on-site unit threshold, reducing what at that time was 19 to 10. With full credit to Roger Blood, I think we've now introduced what has succeeded that as the shortest warrant article change in history, which is a 0-word amendment to the zoning bylaws. What we're proposing simply is to go back to that threshold of 19 for the purposes of the inclusionary zoning bylaw and the option for a cash payment to be made. And I think there's two main reasons for that. One is, as was stated in the 2023 article, part of the rationale for the original change moving from 19 down to 10 was that the CPA was coming online and that there were expectations at that point that CPA funding could make up any potential revenue loss to the Affordable Housing Trust that would come from a tighter cash option threshold. I think since that time, we have seen that there are many competing demands on CPA funds. However, excitingly, this year, there is CPA money that's been recommended for appropriation to the Affordable Housing Trust. But I think what's become clear since 2023 is that it would be wise to look to how we can supplement CPA revenue and ensure that the regular flows of revenue into the trust remain strong. And I think considering moving back up to that 19 threshold is very much in keeping with that. And I think the second piece, or the second piece behind our main rationale here is in looking at the data available to us, what's become very clear is that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a remarkable vehicle for generating new affordable units. And we would contend, based on the data that we've seen, that it's probably the town's most effective tool for doing that. So I think we understand, theoretically the rationale for why we would preference on-site affordable units in new development. But I do want to, if I can share my screen, David, there's a couple charts I wanted to show with some historical data that we've gathered. Thank you. So first, just taking a look at some of the recent projects that have been developed in Brookline with support from the Affordable Housing Trust. You can see these range in total number of units from.
This is so small I can't read it.
Yeah.
Oh, I
sorry.
apologize, Linda. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, can everybody read that? I can try and make it a little larger.
Could you make it just one large? Yeah, that's good.
How's that?
That's better. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, it's hard to tell when I'm screen sharing, so I appreciate that. Um, but looking back retrospectively, these projects run back to 2008. They range in unit size from 24 up to over 110. You can see, the number. Some of these projects were fully affordable in the case of the BHA redevelopments. Um, but just looking at some of kind of the summary statistics here noted at the bottom, what we've seen in terms of the return multiplier on every dollar we've invested from the Affordable Housing Trust since 2008 works out to about a 15 to 1 return. So we're leveraging $15 of value in driving these developments for every one we invest directly from the trust. Um, Additionally, uh, I think that you can see the actual overall contribution percentage from the trust to power these projects is fairly low, only 6.6%. So I think what we're taking from this is, again, this is just an incredible tool for driving the onlining of new affordable units. And really, the return on value for the town's investment here is pretty remarkable. The other thing I wanted to share briefly was this table that was put together by my co-petitioner, um, which just goes to show, kind of from a theoretical perspective, at different thresholds for the on or for the cash payment option, what we would kind of expect to see in a sample development. And apologies for the barking dog if you can hear that. So, looking across the options ranging from 10, where the policy is currently set, up to 19, where we would like to see it set through this article, for excuse me, sorry about that. The required 15% for the ons or for the cash payment, rather, I believe, would be these millions here for each of those. And you can see that the kind of breakage point where the IZ policy would require 2 on-site units to 3 occurs at 16 or 17. For the assessed value of these developments, or the sample development rather, set at 800K a unit, you can see how those values would break out across the different thresholds. This is what we would expect to receive in a cash payment under the current policy at these various threshold points. Of course, you can see the higher it is, generally we're seeing, or the higher number of units rather, you can see the cash payments, of course, increasing. And we've also provided estimates here at both a 10 times multiplier and a 15 times multiplier for investments from the trust. As I just showed, we think the historical data makes a very strong case for the 15 times multiplier. So just wanted to also provide a slightly more conservative estimate to ensure we're somewhere within the realm of possibility. And you can see that at the 10 times level and the 15 times level, we would stand to yield far greater net affordable units if more developers at higher income, or at a higher unit thresholds rather, chose to exercise that cash option. For a 19 unit building, for example, at 10, we'd be looking at being able to invest and create 15 total units rather than simply the 3 that would have been provided on site. And at the 15 times multiplier, which again we believe is strongly supported by historical data, you'd actually see 22 units there. So I think, taken together, both the picture of the data, the way the CPA implementation has played out, and trying, I think, coming from a place of trying to maximize our limited investments that we can make in the greatest possible return in new affordable housing, we believe warrant Article 15 is the right move at this time, and would ask you to consider a vote of favorable action.
Can you put the first chart back up again and just remind
Yes.
us of the multiplier that was, backing into the multiplier for those constructed projects?
Right. Okay, here we go.
Like what was the contribution versus the value of the total affordable units?
Yes. So this was provided to us by planning. So, by any means, if Polly or Roger or someone wants to jump in, like I'm totally fine with that. The way my understanding of how this reads is you've got the total project cost here, you've got the trust's contribution. So, for instance, in St. Aidan's, total project cost of 9.2, 1.6 of that flowed from the trust. The other,
So the first project would only yielded a 6 multiplier, not a 10 or a 15, because the housing trust kicked in 1.6 million to a project that, if we use total development cost as a proxy for assessed value,
yes,
which isn't quite the same, but if we assume total development project cost is assessed value, that's a 6 multiplier. But then down at the bottom, it's an 18 multiplier or something, 3.75 million to get a $75 million project. Does that make sense
that's
to
right.
everybody? Is that the right math?
Yeah, that's my understanding, David.
And then somehow we get like a 50 multiplier on 90 Longwood, with $1 million kicked in for 49 million. Anyway, okay. All right, David Lescoyer, you want to add anything?
Where's okay? Yes, I guess I'm online. I've got my audio on. Thank you, Alex. You did a wonderful job. I'm here on my own behalf. This isn't something that's come to the Community Preservation Act Committee, but we've been very concerned about the fact that in 2023 there was actually a back off on the requirements for cash payments to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Because with the CPA, we specifically, under the Chapter 44 CPA law, we are required to, the towns are required to supplement, not replace funding. So we have money that comes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund appropriated by town meeting through free cash, and the money that comes from inclusionary zoning, community development, block grant, and home. These are all appropriated funds, and we can't use or shouldn't use CPA funds to replace that, only to supplement. So we definitely look to play a role of expanding the capacity of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to mount additional projects. And actually, this year, we've the warrant article 9 is recommending 400,000 for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, exactly for that purpose. And overall, from 22 until now, with all of our funding, over half has gone to community housing projects. So, it's certainly the expectation is that the Community Preservation Act will be a major additional resource to allow for a more affordable housing in Brookline. So it's 54% for community housing, 22% for open space and recreation, and 24% for historic preservation from the inception until what's coming now with warrant article 9, warrant article 8, which will be coming to town meeting in May. Thank you very much. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Yeah. So Linda, we'll definitely get to a broader question period. Do you have something that's sort of timely to clarify things that have been presented? Because I also wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess my first question on the charts that we've been shown was, I think you were getting at it, David, the thing about Longwood. So they included the rehab projects. Because you're claiming that it was 98 units, but this was simply rehabbing all of the units at that development on Longwood, not a new development. So mixing those two is going to change the percentage, but it is also going to be more accurate in terms of how those funds are spent. Right? Can somebody answer that question? Are we looking at the totality of the types of projects, including the rehabs, or are you only presenting to us the new builds?
Well, as far as CPA is concerned, yes, we can do. We can fund creation of new housing. We can also fund preservation of existing housing. We cannot fund rehabilitation,
Right.
unless it's been was created with CPA funds. So we're talking about what the CPA can provide to the Affordable Housing Trust for creation, support, and preservation.
But you
But
also,
I'd like, I think we want to keep our focus on the Affordable Housing Trust and not CPA. I mean, I think that's a part of the conversation, is whether CPA is adding a regular amount of money to a Affordable Housing Trust. But if we're wanting to understand the efficacy of Affordable Housing Trust to create new units, then the petitioners should revise their charts for all boards as well as for town meeting, and not present rehab, because the conversation is really about the creation. I agree, it should be only about the creation of new units, which the story is still similar. I mean, it doesn't change the story significantly, but that's a really good point, Linda.
yeah, it seems like we're mixing them together. Although, you have to look at it both ways, because giving money to the trust and having them rehab units is one of their functions, and it's how this money is going to be used. So, it's really not a completely separate question. But I think the other thing is, I think we should all be on the same page about what is actually required by 4.08 in the bylaw, because people are very confused. I don't think people understand that the 15% is the number of bedrooms, for instance. Everyone thinks of it as the number of units.
It's both.
Both.
Okay, how does that work? How does it work to be both?
Yeah, Polly, can you explain, or Roger, if you want?
Yeah,
Roger.
yeah. The key metric is the number of units, and it's always been, that's the first, it's a primary and secondary metric. The second one was added quite a number of years ago from our early experience, basically to make sure, deter developers from skewing the units that they were going to make as affordable to the smaller, fewer bedroom units. So when you have both metrics, 15 primary, 15 secondary units, bedrooms, it accomplishes the objective of what we need to do.
And
Okay.
David, if I could,
And I agree with what your real quick, your comment before. For purposes of this article, while it's nice to show that we've done work for our mission is creation and preservation, and the Park Street and Longwood were great preservation uses of the trust fund. But for this exercise, where we're talking, especially when you're looking at the leverage metrics, doing a lot with a little, that really should be presented in terms of creation only.
Right.
New units.
Right.
And the premise being, we're talking about, and it's critical expression here in the bylaw, and what we use, it's called cash in lieu. All of this cash is in lieu of on-site units, which are totally unleveraged, and this is the benefits of leverage to get multiple number of units with the same number of local dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Did you
Okay.
have any other?
No, I'll stop for now.
All right, great. So Roger, as long as you have the floor, can you catch us up on where the Housing Advisory Board is with this article, or is it?
Yes, well, yes and no. We want to have a recommendation and be able to have one for town meeting, which, as you know, requires a public hearing first. That date, it was the 15th, but just yesterday, looking at making sure we have a quorum, and plus we have moved that back to April 22nd. So what I can say at this point, and I've had a good dialogue with the petitioners, David and Alec, especially. I'm personally comfortable with the article, and informal. No open meeting law violations. I have not heard any objections from any HAB members, or questions that could be interpreted as objections. So I would expect that on the 22nd, the HAB would be much more likely to support this than to oppose it. And there are reasons that are, you've already started a very good discussion. There may be some nuances that are still worth picking up on.
All right, so I'd like to hear from staff. Polly, do you want to add anything here?
Well, I don't yet. The planning board is going to be taking this up on April 16th. I guess one of the questions I have, it's kind of a simple question. I think you should be able to explain it to a town meeting, is why is it that cash produces more affordable units than providing the affordable units itself?
Yeah.
How does the cash multiply the number of units?
I see Roger he wants to answer, and I think he can probably speak to it more eloquently than I, so happy to defer.
Yeah, yes. It's the ability to draw into Brookline a larger share and dollars from state and federal subsidy programs, the most widely known and most effective of which are federal low-income housing tax credit dollars, which are federal but are brought in through the state. The state looks at giving preference for for the use and deployment of its limited amount of housing assistance, housing subsidy funds. One of the critical measures is or criteria is what is the local community willing to put on the table, and real dollars of resources is a big one. And Brookline has had a really good track record in that regard. The state in looking at giving preferences, and I don't know if this is totally official, but to get any kind of a preference, a minimum of 5%, we've normally and the most recent one being our Walnut High project, put up 10%. The more you put up, the better it is. But and I've often used a general metric, and previously speaking to town meeting, of around a 10-to-1. But as you can see already from the data that you've seen, it varies depending on the project. But and there are, if you can see the way a project is financed, and an illustration of that, there are multiple complex layers of funding that are brought into the project through various state and federal programs. Jonathan Klein is on the call as well. He spent his whole career before he retired as an affordable housing partner of his own law firm, and has an extremely deep knowledge of these various programs and the specifics of they are. But
So you're
question.
So you're saying that state and federal funds they'll be contributed to the local funds for affordable housing, that they'll give you the more funds the town produces, they'll give you funds, whereas that would not be available to the developer.
No, the town goes through a two-step process in this regard. The state, when the developer takes their project to the state for federal and state funding, they come and look to the town to have a conditional letter of commitment. So the HAB has dozens of times worked on that with the developer, and then brought the request to the select board, often with the developer, for the select board to approve a conditional letter of commitment to meet the criteria for the state to see that letter in the developer's package. And that will have a big role in getting our Brookline proposed project preference and priority when the state makes its funding decisions.
So
And,
is it fair to say that Brookline's money is typically first in money as opposed to the last money to finish what's necessary, or is it vary?
yes, that's a great question. Yes, it's in the order of deployment of the funds. There's what's known as pre-development funding. So, you know, the architectural, the engineering, if there's demolition involved. So in the sense of the order, yes, but we refer to it as last dollar in because it makes the project financially feasible. When in the most recent Walnut High project, which you all are familiar with, $75 million project, and the Housing Authority came to us very early and said, we need a town contribution of 10%, 7.5 million, to make it feasible to do. So there's so it depends. First in one sense, but last in a financial sense.
Kelly, and okay, so great. Let's go to questions from the committee. Kelly and then Linda.
Sure. I guess I have two questions. First one is, I really appreciated the chart, Alec, that you showed the benefit of using funds from the Affordable Housing Trust. Do we have a chart that shows the opposite? So since we lowered the threshold for units to be created within a development, do we know how many units have been created? And basically what impact the 2023 warrant article had in terms of increased units, my first question. And then the second question is, excuse me, how does this impact basically developments in progress? So thinking about some proposed large scale developments, we have, again, lowered the number within recent memory. How does increasing, sort of bringing that number back up, impact any developments that are already in flight or permitted? Thank you.
Polly, you want to try that? I mean, my guess is that with the interest rate environment, the amount of time that's passed between 23 and 26, and this narrow lens of only relevant projects are more than 10 and less than 20, there may not be anything to look at. I mean, have there been projects in that size range that have been permitted?
Between
10 and 20.
what size range?
Yep.
Well,
10
in the
to-
size range that this article pertains to, it doesn't
What
really relate to,
impacts?
it does, I mean, you're talking about the contribution side, right? Kelly, your question is really about the contribution side.
So
that-
actually, my first question is about the number of units that have been created within developments. So under IZ, when we lowered the threshold to 10, how many units have been created in the last 3 years? None.
I mean, I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but I can definitely look it up.
2 Clark Road is 5 on-site units, but that is over that threshold.
Okay.
So it wouldn't, I mean, so yeah, it's a complicated question, Kelly, because it really doesn't, it doesn't impact 2 Clark Road. The ability to contribute funds to a project like 2 Clark Road might be affected by increasing the flow of funds to the Affordable Housing Trust. But it would be required to have on-site units no matter what. Because it's
Indeed, because of the size, right? It's 65 units or something. So
And
yes, no doubt.
also, I think in the
30
zoning,
35
in the
units.
Oh, sorry,
zoning,
35. Yep. Sorry.
in the zoning itself, it says that the units have to be on site.
Okay.
Yeah, Kelly, I don't think there's, I mean, since it's passed, I don't think there's been any on-site that are over 10 and under 19.
Okay.
It's
Okay,
all
thank you.
been the ones that are in that size had their decision before that was changed.
Okay. Okay.
And
Perfect. Thank you.
what's the threshold on Harvard Street?
I
Because
don't
it
think there-
exempts
I don't
Harvard
think there
Street.
is one. I thought it was 4 units. I thought it was at every unit, right, Roger?
Yeah, that was an anomaly, and where the option to pay cash for reasons beyond the HAB's purview was eliminated, and we are expecting that it's going to be reinstated.
Oh, okay. Well, that's whole,
Yeah,
but it's not part of this warrant article. Okay,
No.
that wasn't my question.
But that was part of what happened in the whole, run-up
Yes.
process, was that there were
Yeah.
there were parties that thought that there shouldn't be a contribution option at all. And as part of trying to
Right.
get it to town meeting, that was
Right.
done.
Right. No, so that was not my question why I had my hand up.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Kelly's all set. All right. To me, what this is about is what type of affordable housing do we prefer? Do we prefer it to be, BHA, public housing with its, very low income thresholds and the 30% of the income being required? To me, that's true affordable housing. Or do we care more about the mixed income building? Do we care more about having things in the range of 80 to 100% AMI for criteria, et cetera? And to me, it's all dependent on, are there future opportunities for new BHA housing? And I'm not seeing that. That's what's kind of got me puzzled about this, because we're being asked to make this change so that the Housing Trust Fund has more money to spend on, to leverage these federal and state dollars, really is what the argument is. But I'm asking myself, where are the opportunities to build brand new, like Dumber Street or something like that, that is, an available site that is, some nonprofit or BHA is going to want to build on. And I don't see that happening. I mean, I think we've used a lot of, even getting the temple. I mean, maybe there's something that's going to come along, but it seems more fundamental that is the question we're being asked here, rather than, how best to use these dollars in an abstract way with leveraging these funds. And then the other question to follow on to that is, what is happening on the federal level? And is it even realistic to think that we're going to get any federal affordable housing dollars in the near future?
So let's take those questions separately. And then I think it's also important not to, when you make that characterization, I think it's important to include the low-income housing non-government developers, because they've also played a large role in Brookline.
Yeah, like the nonprofits, like Two Life, is that what you
New
mean?
Life
Yeah,
and
sure. Yeah.
and Hebrew Senior
Pine
Life,
Street area.
because right, because they've been they're building significant projects and have the same need and profile and everything. So yeah, so I guess it's a good question for, Polly, Roger, Jonathan, you guys who are kind of in the know. Do you see a pipeline of these projects?
It's a policy question, but it's also a very, very on target specific question. I would say the answer is yes. First of all, the Walnut High Phase 2, they haven't put exact numbers on that yet, but we've queried, because anytime we're advocating for better funding of the trust, that's the first question that we should be able to answer, is where will it be deployed? And so for Walnut High Phase 2 is going to be most likely in the $8 to $10 million need, closer to 10 at this stage, without any design or anything like that, but just knowing the site and the number of units. We have a general in our housing production plan, which lays out our much of our policy. The goal of being, because there's no undeveloped sites in Brookline to speak of, opportunities for affordable housing over existing municipal parking lots. We already have one proposal. It's on the back burner at the moment, but it's still there, fairly costly, over the Kent Station Street parking lot, if you're all familiar with that. We accepted Two Life was the lead applicant on that is still expressing a willingness to go ahead. The cost per unit on that will be higher than what we've had in the past, because it has to retain the municipal parking as well. But it would still be, in today's world, a very good deployment and leveraged funds. Also, something that we've been aware of for years, but it's very important, is something called expiring use. We have a large volume of affordable housing, both senior and family, in town, where they were financed decades ago. Unlike today, where the affordable restrictions are so-called perpetuity, they used to be done to the term of the financing, the mortgages, 30 years, for example. We have a large one now that has hit the town's attention and certainly tenants' attention. It's called the Village Way down on Station Street, and also across the tracks on Kent Street. Likewise, senior and family, that are a very large number of units whose affordability restrictions will be expiring. Some sooner, some later, but some as soon as the end of next year. That's also an area where trust funds will be very much needed. Even though we were talking about the creation of new units, this is preservation. But when those current restrictions and state support and federal expires, and it's tax credits and other sources, the state is going to step back in. They're not going to fund the whole thing, but some of the same criteria apply. If the town is willing to put up its resources, we will get to go to the top, get the preference from the state in that kind of a situation as well. And we are currently looking at that, and that would be a multi-million-dollar call upon the Housing Trust in the same kind of leveraged way that we're talking about here. Other parking lot would include Babcock Street. That's in the plan with prospective housing, and we did a visioning of that as well in the housing production plan. So there, for the foreseeable number of years, and especially with the rising costs, we need to have significant balances available in the trust to do those.
Okay, nobody answered my second question about the changing federal support.
Right, well, whoever has a magic 8-ball or Ouija board.
Well,
or
I mean,
whatever.
something must have happened already, knowing TACO.
Yeah,
so-
Jonathan, tell us what you think the future holds for LIHTC. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm Jonathan Klein, member of the HAB and a town meeting member, and also a candidate for BHA commissioner. So there may be some either conflicts of interest or confluence of interest here in how I answer these things, but you should be aware of all that. But I have other things to say later, but on the specific question of federal support, the largest single subsidy for affordable housing is the low-income housing tax credit. And in typical projects like the BHA's projects and the Two Life projects and the Hebrew Senior Life projects, that provides over 50% of the subsidy that goes into the projects. That actually has been very stable over time and increased. And in fact, in the either one big beautiful bill or one big bad bill, however you think of the tax legislation that went through, nearly a year ago, that actually included increases in the low-income housing tax credits. So there are some other resources that are probably going to be squeezed, like home funds and CDBG funds. We're looking at cuts, but I think overall the federal funding is going to be pretty stable and has been pretty stable because there's such a huge coalition of both, affordable housing developers and banks and insurance companies and investors who are all part of that ecosystem.
But the Section 8 has been reduced, right?
Section 8 is under pressure, but it has such a huge constituency, again, with a lot of both private landlords and nonprofit landlords, that there haven't been dramatic cuts or dramatic suggested cuts the way there have been for food stamps, for example, or Medicaid and Medicare. So I think that there's going to be enough funding at and a lot of the money, by the way, comes from the state as well, not just the federal government. And they're trying to make up for some of the federal cuts. So I think there's going to be a similar amount of money coming into these projects in the next 5 years as there has been for the last 5 years. That's my guess.
Okay, thank you.
David Lescoyer, and then we'll go to Brian Ladd.
Yeah, I wanted to follow on what Roger is saying because I think we have appreciate he has a broader view with the expiring affordable housing that we have in Brookline and uh, pro- the housing support to prevent homelessness. All of these things, I think, are going to be more and more the concern of the Housing Advisory Board and the trust. It's not only building, but it's keeping what we have, um, maintaining its habitability and dignity. And so that's, I think we see with the CPA that that's role. We focus here on the multiplier for creation, but we were very clear when we made the recommendation for our 400,000 for the HAB that would be for the three purposes: creation, preservation, and support. So one way that we envision working with the HAB is to, and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is to provide the incentive and the resources for a broad look at maintaining as well as expanding affordable housing in Brookline. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just, sorry to jump in, Brian, I'll just add a comment that I do view renegotiating for perpetual low income, the expiring use sites as creation, because it's the opposite of having them fall off they won't be affordable units any longer, and they won't be on the subsidized housing inventory. So if we can have new deals that have perpetual protection, then that goes under creation in my views.
However you call it, it would be eligible under CPA.
Right. Brian.
Thanks. Couple little things. First of all, I back to the 15% issue, just to clarify for anybody's use here. Actually, in a different context, a while ago, Linda called me out on that, and I went back to the zoning code. The bedroom calculation is not there, but it's in the town's binding guidelines, so it's a little bit confusing, but you put them together, and that's the picture if anybody's looking for it. First of all, just what I think is a very simple question, naive question maybe. So with this warrant article, then the 1120 range will be optional for the developer. From everything I'm hearing about the money, I think we're assuming that the developer would do the cash payment nearly always. Am I correct in that?
More often than not, although relating to your question, and I think it was raised earlier, if you look at the frequency distribution of projects and the unit counts in them, there isn't all that many projects in the 11 to 19 range. The longest period of time when we have been administering this, it was neither 10 nor 19, it was 16. And so even then, there are some projects that are in the just slightly over 10, 11, 12, 13 range. But as you go up, but on the other hand, if one does occur in that mid-range, it would produce a significant individual cash contribution. It's just very hard to predict or count on anything in any particular time frame.
Okay.
Other questions, Brian?
Yeah, I really just sort of want to put out there a couple skeptical notes for future argument, town meeting and everything. One of them I think has been pretty well dealt with, which is the availability of sites. I think Roger's point about expiring units is very important in that context. I mean, he mentioned the parking lots, but we have to remember whenever you're claiming a site, there's going to be other claims on it, and that doesn't come by itself. The other question I want to raise, as someone who's an outsider to this, is this notion of a multiplier or leverage sounds like magic. But I know Jonathan Klein once tried to explain to me the whole process of putting together the financing for affordable housing, and my head was spinning. And I admire those of you who engage in that Sisyphean task. So my question is, do we need to worry about resources, time, costs that are going to be devoted to this process, hiring high-priced lawyers and everything else, that are being assumed when we talk about a multiplier and leverage? Or is that all going to be available and to be accomplishable in the time frame that would be available anyway? Thanks.
I think I can take a quick crack at that. The answer is, yeah, well, is it yes or is it no? No, we aren't gonna need, high-priced lawyers and, that level of complexity. Interestingly, in the bylaw, when the HAB was created, it mandated, and during my time, I've devoted a lot of commitment to making sure that this is fulfilled. There are designated skill sets that are required of HAB members that, and everybody's on the HAB, nobody's paid, but they bring the skill sets happily to be meaningful for the town. Jonathan's a great example on the legal side. Yes, there's the complexity there, but we are really fortunate in Brookline to have partners that have that combined skill set. So when the funding ask comes to the town, it's all of that sophistication and cost is brought with it. For many years, the BHA didn't have that, and we wanted to encourage, and it finally did develop a development arm rather than just a management arm. So they're really just as good as a 2 Life or Heber Senior Life, for example, now. And so our role is to vet that, value engineer it, or make sure that there's no waste in it, and then bring it to the select board and have them have the confidence that it's that the town's money is well spent. And we have spent minimal amount of, if anything, really, on lawyers or consultants to help put these packages together.
I have a question. Brian, do you have more questions?
You're muted, Brian.
Oops. I just want to say, for the town meeting audience, we need to be prepared to explain how a multiplier works, which I know you're all capable of doing. Okay, thanks, I'm done.
So I think we on this committee understand the work of the Department of Planning and Community Development, in as much as it's not, a bunch of people with tracing paper coming up with nifty ideas for visions for the town. As much as they do that, they do it in their spare time, because they're already at 100% with regulatory responsibilities. And a big chunk of the regulatory responsibilities, and we have Emily here as well as Polly, is keeping constant track of all of our affordable units. And that means that when a homeownership restricted unit changes hands, that whole transaction has to be overseen in terms of what the sale value is, because there's caps on how much appreciation is allowed, and also that the buyer is a qualified low-income buyer. And the same thing goes with rental. And so I guess it would be nice to hear, Polly, from you just a little bit about what that looks like and what the burden is, because there's a practical aspect of this at that projects of up to 16, which is that they would have 2 units of affordable housing, and then there's a break, and a project of 17 or more would have on-site required 3 units of affordable housing. And it just seems to me that perhaps that there's a burden with tracking smaller projects, not just for the developer and the owner of the project, but also for the town, that could argue in favor of at least raising the number to that threshold, which is pretty near the 19 that's being proposed.
David, if I might just chime in for a very quick second, in terms of the divisions within the planning department, because we've got Polly is here, who heads the regulatory division, and I'm sure she'll answer this as well. But then there's the housing division is one of three divisions in the way the department is organized, and Emily is here as well. And the actual most of the monitoring of the kind of thing you're talking about, and it's worth covering in this discussion in a broader sense, is done in the housing division. But with that said, and I also I feel badly I didn't mention in terms of the HABs vetting that the requirement of 4.08 even requires a developer to bring the housing plan, and the first layer of vetting and review before it even comes to the HAB is at the staff of the housing division. And they have a whole critical set of skill sets that they bring. So you're talking about several layers of due diligence. So with that, excuse me for interrupting.
I was going to say the same, Roger. Really, it's the housing division that handles the lotteries and all of the details about, you know, who gets the affordable units. So Emily would have to answer that
Yeah,
question.
Emily.
Sorry, I had to run to the bathroom. What's the question?
I
Yeah,
was,
David.
yeah, I was just saying that you guys do an awful lot of work tracking all of the restricted units, both homeownership and rental throughout town, and you have to make sure that the only people that can buy all the different work that you do to make sure that our affordable units are still to purpose. And is there an argument or a reason to consider raising this threshold such that developments with 2 units, meaning 16 or fewer, under 17, could perhaps have this relief, which is close to the 19, but not exactly. So should that be part of the conversation? This question of small developments being a real burden, management burden all around, including for your department, that it would make sense to sort of do the cash payment for up to projects under 17 units or not?
I don't know whether I can answer that. My colleague Linda does the monitoring every year, and I think usually these units will be local action units. So she would just make sure that they comply, and then if they resell, she would do the lottery for them. So I think it's probably a little more work, especially for resales, to have these scattered units. But I think, you gotta weigh that for actually having affordable units scattered like that, as well as benefits to the town. So I think, yeah, there's just a lot to consider with this.
All right, Jonathan, you have a comment, and then we'll go to Linda.
Yeah, I have several comments if you're in the public comment part. So, sure.
Well, Linda, you still asking questions?
Still asking
you're-
questions. I'm still asking questions.
Yeah, please, let's do questions, and then we'll open
Okay,
the public hearing.
so I have 3 questions. One is part of the motivation of this warrant article an acknowledgement that developers prefer to avoid the hassle of the on-site units and all of the monitoring and documentation that is required therein? I mean, is it part of the thinking of the proponents that if we change this threshold and it's easier, quote unquote, easier for developers because all they have to do is make this payment rather than maintaining these affordable units on site, that will encourage greater market rate housing development? Is that in anybody's mind here? Because it seems obvious to me that that's part of it, but I don't know if that's what people are thinking. That's my first question.
I can comment on that. In attending and listening to HAB meetings, certainly we were aware of the administrative nuts and bolts of on-site, and certainly if you do cash payment, you avoid it and all of that. So it does would result in less additional pressure on the staff, we assume.
But you're not
And Linda-
opining on how it affects developers' thinking.
I'm happy to speak to that, which is I can just tell you from the petitioner's perspective and sitting down and thinking through this article and whether or not to bring it, the conversation was how do we optimize our inclusionary zoning policy to produce the most affordable units. And
Okay.
this is where we landed.
Okay, all right. So that wasn't part of your thinking. Okay, so I know, David, you didn't want to get all into the CPA, but I'm still confused by something that David Lescoyer said about it, because I thought I heard him say that we cannot use CPA funding to replenish the Housing Trust Fund funds. No, he's shaking his head. So, yeah, could we get some clarification on that, please?
The
Yeah.
CPA, I mean, I've worked with a lot of different towns, and town councils in different towns slice and dice their interpretation a little bit differently of the restrictions on what CPA can spend money on, and I find that interesting. But what it basically says, and we've seen this chart at town meeting before, a very simple chart that says what CPA can and can't spend in terms of housing. But fundamentally, it can't do repairs or
Mhm.
capital fix-ups, new roofs, windows, things like that on projects unless those projects were originally funded through CPA. So if it's one of their babies, if there's a
Mhm.
new project that's funded
Mhm.
by CPA, then CPA funds can go towards renewal. But otherwise, it can't be diverted just into kitchen replacement projects. And I think that's
Okay,
I
so
think that's what he was saying.
there's a request coming as part of the CPA warrant article. I haven't even reviewed this, so this is just my lack of knowledge, but that is going to put money into the Housing Trust Fund, though.
It's
Yeah.
unrestricted. It's money for future commitments that the
Okay.
Housing Trust Fund may decide to make. It can't
Okay.
be to support existing or already committed
Just
allocations.
just one more clarification on this relatively nuanced question and why different town councils have different interpretations, is that CPA funds can be spent to preserve affordable housing. So if affordable housing were to no longer exist, then CPA funds can, it's a critical need and it would be lost otherwise. And I've seen town councils use that understanding to green light roof replacements
We're
under the
doing a
argument
roof replacement.
that the housing would leak and it would fall apart and it would be
Mhm.
torn down.
Right.
And so that's a preservation need.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're recommending money for the Trustman Apartments roof in this cycle.
Okay, and so then just my other kind of musing, and I don't know that anyone's going to have an answer to this, but is this going to change the potential for having affordable condominium projects? Because I just lament the fact that we just can't seem to do that, that it's always, I mean, St. Aidan's was a unique unicorn, it seems. And I just think it would be nice to generate more ownership opportunities in the affordable realm. And I just kind of trying to think through if I think this is going to impact that potential or not.
It's a good question. Of course, St. Aidan's is not unique quite in that regard because Olmsted Hill
Right.
was all ownership, all affordable, and a good example. And the housing production plan acknowledges the desirability to have a first-time homeownership of that sort. And within the HAB, we are currently looking at possible practical ways to encourage more of that within the trust fund, and more to come on that soon.
Okay.
My experience just across the Commonwealth in my low-income housing architecture practice is that it has to do mostly with two factors. One is that there is a kind of a long cycle, and Jonathan could probably speak to this more because he's been in the financing end. But condo versus rental, the market is efficient. We know markets are efficient, but over time, condo and rental each they take turns being shinier in terms of the economic analysis, and you have developers tending towards one and tending towards the other, and often you also have periods where a lot of rental housing is produced across the nation, and then there's periods where there've been periods where condo conversion of repositioning rental properties and selling them off also happened. So that's, that it's kind of that's one factor. The other factor is that we're in a very small boutique market, right? Brookline. And there are developers who simply just have a preference. And that's typically around here. It seems like that's for long-term hold because it's family wealth. They're essentially creating a portfolio. I mean, I think the intent of the developer for 2 Clark Road was to build his portfolio he doesn't want to sell. He wants to build
He wants rents.
an annuity with continuing. And I think Chestnut Hill Realty the same way. Our biggest developer just long term has been building a portfolio of rental housing, and so it's idiosyncratic. Other developers may be more interested in essentially and I think local maybe wants to hold, corporate maybe wants to show quarterly earnings, I don't know, Jonathan, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I have several things to say, so let me just address that first and then take my opportunity if that's okay. So on that, affordable home ownership is actually much more expensive to develop than rental because the state and federal subsidies available for it are much smaller and harder to come by. And that's partly because there's concern. Home ownership is usually targeted to higher income brackets, even affordable to 80 or 100 or 120%. And when there are limited subsidies, there's a lot of pressure for those subsidies to go to the needier population, those at 30 or 50 or 60% of AMI. And there just aren't the state and federal programs that provide the subsidy. I mean, I'll give you one example. I was personally involved in an attempt to build a 10-unit all affordable development on a small lot behind my synagogue on Lancaster Court. And we had actually a lot of excitement and encouragement from the town and from the Brookline CDC and also from the Jamaica Plain NDC, which was going to be the lead developer. And at the end of the day, they walked away from the project because the costs were too high and the subsidy requirement was too high. And they could not imagine it would have actually required about $400,000 or $500,000 per unit of subsidy. And that was more subsidy than was ever reasonable to expect from the HAB. So
That's unfortunate, but thanks for that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but that's the reality of why it's so hard to do. Olmsted Hill actually got done because it was town-owned land that could be provided, and the developer was able to take 10 single-family lots, develop them, make money on it, and then subsidize the affordable unit. So that really was a one-off as far as I understood it. So it's just very, very hard to do. So
let me just formally open the public hearing portion of this of this meeting, and we will hear from the one member of the public who's with us. Jonathan, please proceed.
Just a couple more comments and reflections. One question that was asked early on was on the impact of the reduction, right? And then we heard from, I think, someone that said, as far as they knew, there were no projects in that kind of 10 to 19 developed during that period. Now, that might partly be a result of interest rates and the development environment, but it might also, there is a cause and effect. And I think part of the cause and effect is it made it more difficult for those developments, those buildings to be developed because of the on-site requirement. I think, as someone who's been involved in managing and creating and producing and managing and regulating housing for a long time, it's very hard to have a very small building with several affordable units. It's much easier if you have a 100-unit building and you have 15 affordable units. That's something you can set up systems to take care of and to manage and to rent out. When you have a 10-unit building with 2 affordable units, it just is a much higher burden. And I think developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, naturally would just shy away from that. So I think it it was a real impediment to that. And I think, speaking personally, I think changing it and increasing it may make it more possible to get some of that missing middle housing developed, not huge projects, but, you know, infill housing where there are opportunities to do smaller developments. The last thing I want to say is I want to answer Linda's question of what kind of affordable housing do we want? And my answer to that is all kinds of affordable housing. I want, you know, deeply affordable housing that the BHA provides. I want moderate income housing that gets provided in our, you know, inclusionary zoning ordinance and 40B projects. And I want, if we could figure out how to do it, to figure out how to serve more what I sometimes also call missing middle housing of people at 80 or 100 or 120% of median who can't afford Brookline. And if we could figure out ways to provide housing for them and subsidize it and encourage developers to build it, I think that would be terrific. And I think all of that requires more money in the trust fund. If we had more money in the trust fund, we could be more generous and find more ways to encourage that housing. So that's my public comment. I think this is a good change and I support it, and I hope it will be approved at town meeting.
Could someone remind us of the, I mean, I can remind us of the income thresholds under 40B, which is in order to qualify, a project has to have 25% of its units capped at 80% of AMI, area median income. And
Or
if they can-
20%
Or,
at 50.
right,
Is it 50 or 60?
It's 50. There's a choice. It's 20 at 50 or 25 at 80.
Correct. So what are the thresholds for the 15% inclusionary zoning?
for rental, it's 50% AMI. And for owner, it's 80% AMI. This, the higher income for ownership is, you know, that kind of a policy goes well beyond Brookline. And there are some options on top of that. Now we're departing from the trust fund question here. We're talking about.
Well, I just wanted us to be informed. Yeah,
Right,
yeah, you can buy, a developer can buy their way into make a bigger contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to get up to 100% or something like that. Is that what you're going to say?
No,
You said there's options.
no, it's on the on-site side. There's what's called a supplemental fee to the trust fund. So, for example, they have a rental project.
Oh, the rental can go up. Yeah.
No, on both. It applies to both. But on a rental, the baseline requirement is 50% AMI, which is more costly for them. They can pay a lump sum contribution into the trust and then do 80% AMI instead of 50 in a rental project. Likewise, for ownership, the baseline requirement is 80% AMI for on-site units, affordable for the 15%. But they have the option of making a payment into the trust for the privilege of doing their ownership at 100% AMI. If you follow, they're going to
Right.
get.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So discussion.
Well, I mean, to me, it comes back to this question of valuing the mixed income housing model. I think I'm most persuaded by Jonathan's characterization of how difficult it is to do the smaller projects with the on-site. That, you know, in terms of management, that makes sense to me. So I'm inclined to be supportive, but I do think I think that question, it is a policy question that's what town meeting should be grappling with, in part, in deciding this. I do value the truly affordable housing a great deal, and I think that's a goal for many in town meetings. So I think it'll be well received. So that's my thoughts at the moment.
And I'll just add that I share Linda's desire to have mixed income housing, but based on what I see here, I think we need to work on making that for work for the 20+ projects, and I'm supportive of this change.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'd asked the question about how many units had been created since we'd lowered the threshold, was I wanted to understand what the what practical change we'd made in town, because I do like the idea of that. I prefer that. But again, I think this makes a lot of sense given what we've heard, and I am supportive.
Yeah, I would just echo those sentiments. I do. My first thought is always that what we want is mixed income housing. We want units distributed. We don't want rich people's buildings and poor people's buildings. We would much prefer to have it just not visible and just to have everybody be part of our community and live together. But from a practical standpoint, I did have a conversation with Steve Hyken a few weeks ago, in which he sort of was pondering this idea of, instead of under 19 being under 17, and to tag it more rationally to that flip from 2 units to 3 required on site. I would just say I don't feel that this subcommittee needs to propose that change, but if the HAB debated it and felt that that was somehow good, I think I would be sympathetic to it if it came back to advisory.
Can I make one final comment? And
Sure.
as part of the public hearing, since it's not been directly touched, Jonathan came very close and made a very good point about the difficulty, I guess, legally and financially of doing these smaller projects with the affordable. But another dimension of that's worth knowing is staff-wise and administrative-wise, we don't have the kinds of affordable housing staffs that Cambridge and Boston has, for example. You basically got one person using part of their time to do this administration. Emily, who's with us. Other people are helpful, but Emily does most of it. You know about the inventory, the SHI, and to get credit for that. Fortunately, we're over the 10% now, and that's got to be protected with this expiring use defense. What I refer to as the onesie twosies, they require more effort for eligibility determination to get on the SHI than the larger projects and the larger units. So the upfront staff input to establish that is more in terms of person hours, and then the monitoring is a perpetual obligation of the town. Once in a property you have 1 or 2 units, for example. Again, it's unique in that sense, and there's a certain logic to where we're going to make sure that now, if you're going to do on-site affordables and from the staffing upfront and monitoring effort, at least there's 3 units involved, 3 or more units, not a 1 or a 2. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would entertain a motion if a member of the subcommittee wished to make one.
I will. Oh, so go ahead,
Nope, go
Kelly.
ahead, Linda.
All right. Yeah, I will move favorable action on warrant article 15.
And I will second.
Thank you. Linda,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
and I concur. So we have a unanimous vote. Thank you, everybody.
Almost never happens.
Well, yeah. So that I think I'll conclude the hearing.